What's it like being a Nintendo widow?
A lot of listening to, the music is the most annoying thing, I think, of the whole thing.
So you want to make 8-bit music? Well, if you've never used FamiTracker before, it can be pretty weird. But I have good news. This video will help shorten the learning curve and get you on your way to making your very own chiptunes. So sit back, follow along, and who knows, maybe one day you can become the next James Banana. So as we just heard in the intro, this video is not intended to be a super in-depth tutorial where I break down everything that FamiTracker can do. Instead, the goal of this video is to be like a crash course where I can go in, highlight a few important things to know so that you can start coming up with your own ideas and making sound in as little time as possible. If you do want to go deeper, this will be the first video in a mini-series where I detail my favorite FamiTracker techniques and go more in depth with the software. And towards the end of the video, I'll also highlight some resources that helped me when I was first starting out that will help you get the basics down and give you a strong foundation. So the first thing that we have to do is go in and take a look at the software. So here we are in FamiTracker. Yours may look a little bit different than mine. That's just because I've adjusted the color scheme and changed the fonts, so no big deal. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is this song information box. This is basically the metadata for your track. It's optional. If you want to fill it out, you can. We're going to be using, as an example today, the original theme from the NES Super Mario Bros. Game. So that's SMB Theme. Author will be 𝗙𝗔𝗠𝗘𝗥. And the copyright will be Nintendo 1985, just to give you an idea. And then from there, we move to the left. This is the song settings tab. A lot of this video is going to be me telling you things that you don't need to worry about. Two of those things are these first two settings, speed and tempo, believe it or not. Speed has to do with how the original software's clock synced with the video frame rate in the original software. So there is situations where you may want to, in the future, pay attention to this. Right now, leave it alone. And tempo, believe it or not, I never change the tempo. There's a better way to adjust your tempo, which I'll show you when we start inputting musical data. What you do need to pay attention to are rows and frames. Rows are these things down here. So I'm scrolling through rows right now. And the rows contain your musical data. So things like pitch, instrument, volume, effects. These are all things that are contained within the rows. You'll also notice that in this field it says 64. So if I bring this down to 1, all of those rows disappeared. So now as I add them back in, you'll see we start adding rows, and then something happens when I get to row number 10. Instead of counting to 10, it goes 0A. This is because the FamiTracker uses something called hexadecimal, which uses a base of 16. So instead of like decimals, like the decimal system uses a base of 10, hexadecimal uses a base of 16, which is convenient for programming music because it's divisible by 4. And just to further drive home the point, what happens is, when I get to F, when I get to F, now I get that 1. So basically, you can think of it like this. The right row and the left row are kind of discrete in a way. And so the right row is counting up those hexadecimals. And if you were to count from 0 through F in the alphabet, that would give you 16 integers. Every 16th integer, now you go up to the next level, I guess if you want to call it. And that just goes all the way through. And what I recommend a lot of times is, what I used to do was I would count out how many measures I needed in any given section and do the math and then come up with how many rows that I needed. Also important, basically, if you think of, an easy way to think of rows is as subdivided rhythmic intervals. So what do I mean by that? Basically, an easy way to think about it is to think of each row as being a 16th note. So every one of these highlighted rows is a new beat. So basically I have beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, and then this lighter color brings me, if I'm in 4/4 time, brings me to the second bar. So that's an easy way to think about it. So like I was saying, I used to do the math and figure out how many measures I needed in any given section. Now what I do is I just go to the max, which is 256. I don't know. Okay, there we go. 256. And then now I have 256 rows. And then what I can do is I can input in commands as I'm programming my music that can act as, they can shorten sections. They act as kind of like roadmap, if you're familiar with like reading sheet music. Things like second endings, codas, these kinds of DS signs that can help me navigate my form of my track. So that's rows. And I'll show you how to do that a little later on. Frames, think of frames as being the sections of your songs. So if you have like intro, verse, chorus, or A, B, C, D, we can think of them that way. Each frame is a different section. So I can think of 0, 0 as maybe my intro, 0, 1 as being my A section, 0, 2 being my B section. Another thing that you can do with frames is say I want a section to repeat. So what I can do in here is I can say 01, 01, 01, 01, 01. This will make sense later on, but basically each one of these corresponds to your instrument channels. So if I say 01, 01, 01, 02, 02, 02, 02, and then now if I want to repeat my A section, I can go add another frame, and then now instead of copy pasting or putting the data in again, I can essentially copy the information from frame 1 just by putting in a repeat of these numbers up here. So that's a quick way of looking at how rows and frame works. Edit settings, don't worry about. It has to do with basically manual controls of inputting notes. We don't need to worry about that right now. So now that we have a feel for how FamiTracker is laid out and how trackers work, the next thing that we need to do is start designing instruments. And we're going to do that in the instrument panel. So let's start by talking about these 5 channels here. These were the 5 channels offered by the 2A03 chip. You have 2 pulse wave channels, which are kind of like square waves, although they're a little bit different. We'll talk about why in a minute. Triangle, straightforward. Noise channel, which is used usually for like drums and percussion. And DPCM, which lets you import your own samples into FamiTracker, although they are like a really low sample rate, so the quality is bad, but they are still fun to use. If we come up here, this is the instrument panel where all of the instruments that you design for your projects will live. So if we want to add an instrument, we can right-click, click Add. We can also add with this icon right here, or we can use this drop-down menu, and you'll see New 2A03 Instrument. If we were using an expansion chip like the VR6 chip, we would see that here, and we could select which chip we wanted to design an instrument for. But since we're not using one of those right now, we can just use 2A03. If we want to remove an instrument, we can right-click on the instrument and click Remove, or we can use this X icon. And if we want to rename the instrument, we can do it in this field, and that's how that works. Now, to edit the sound, we would select it and double-click, and in here you'll see Instrument Settings, Sequence Editor, and then there's this piano roll down here that will let you hear what you're working on. So that's where we're at right now. So to change the sound, we need to apply these effects. So we have a volume effect, an arpeggio effect, pitch effect, high pitch, duty noise. And then you'll notice as I scroll through these, the graphs in the sequence editor change a little bit. So we're going to start with the volume effect. And you could basically think of this like an ADSR envelope. So in synthesis, ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, release. So attack means how long does it take for your synthesizer to get to peak amplitude or volume. Decay is how much does it retreat from that peak volume. Sustain is how long does it stay at that level for, and then release is how long does it take to stop making sound. So if I want to edit this sequence editor, I would click and drag and kind of draw on here, but you'll notice that as I'm doing that, nothing's happening. So we have to first come down to this size parameter and start adding in rows. And if I go back to 1, you'll see here 0. This will change as I click and drag around here, or I can also do it manually here. They have different applications. So there's certain situations where I do it manually with the numbers, but there's most of the time I kind of draw on the graph. And you'll also see this here, 16 ms. That means every one of these rows takes 16 milliseconds to complete. So it's actually 16.666666 repeated, but every 6 rows is 1,000 milliseconds. And this is super important because this lets you really kind of get into programming in some really interesting rhythmic effects. So if we just start by drawing in a really simple shape, this is kind of like a transient, we can hear the difference there. Now, you'll notice though, if I hold down the key, the sound continues to go indefinitely. That's because you want to have, if you want your sound to cut off, the last row should be 0. And then that will end in silence. Now, there's something else important. This effect, any effect that you're using needs to be checked, because if it's not going to apply the effect. Now, there's something else to know. This sequence number, right? So this is sequence 0. If I open up another sequence, I get a blank slate. And then if I just kind of randomly, draw in a shape here, now it'll sound like that. And this is kind of handy because if I start designing multiple instruments, I can apply, I can say, all right, well, I want sequence 1 for volume, sequence 0 maybe for volume, and then I can have other sequences for other effects. And this can be an efficient way to kind of, program instruments. I usually, though, end up just kind of like coming up with a sound in my mind and just doing it all from scratch. But honestly, I should probably do it more like this. So let's look at the rest of the effects. Arpeggio, if you're not familiar with what an arpeggio is, in music, if we play a chord, which is 3 notes played at the same time, if we take those same pitches and then we play them horizontally, we stretch them out over time, that's what's known as an arpeggio. So this basically works as kind of like a step sequencer. So if I just add in some rows here and just start kind of randomly drawing around, we get this. This is not the most musical application for it, but you get the idea. So you can, and this is actually a good application for programming in manually. So like if I do something like just quickly, maybe like something like this, and you see that, and then now I get a nice major chord that way. So this can be, especially when you're only using 5 channels, this can be a really efficient way to get harmony into your tracks. But we're not going to worry about that for this project. Pitch and high pitch have to do with making changes to the frequency of the patch over time. So something, think like vibrato. We're not going to use that for this, so don't worry about it. But we will use duty noise. Now, if you think back to these pulse wave channels, basically, what duty noise does is, in synthesis, every oscillation has a positive phase and a negative phase. What duty noise does is something called pulse width modulation. So what that means is it's taking, if you have a synth patch that has an equal time for its positive phase and its negative phase, so it completes, each of those phases in equal time for one oscillation, pulse width modulation shifts that axis. So maybe the positive phase takes longer and the negative phase takes shorter, or vice versa. The positive phase takes shorter and the negative phase takes longer. What this does is it changes the timbre of your sound. Timbre, if you don't know, is basically like the fingerprint of the sound, the quality of the sound. It's what lets you tell the difference between, say, like an acoustic guitar and a flute and a clarinet and an electric bass. Each of those instruments has a different timbre, and that's what our brains use to kind of like pick up on those differences. So duty noise, if we add the effect in here and we add a row just like before, we can hear. And now if I change that, we get subtle changes in the timbre. And we also get this oscilloscope over here to show us graphically what these changes are doing. I don't know what I just did there. Okay, here we go. And then we can kind of see the changes. You can also apply pulse width modulation over time. So like if I do something like this, I can get a different sound quality, an evolving sound quality. And obviously this is a short amount of time, so, you know, like you can kind of play around and, you know, maybe having it unfold over something like that. So you can kind of get these very like NES-y kind of sound effects. Something else to keep in mind that we're also not going to use, but just something that's good to know. This dark gray bar down here, if I left click, I get a loop bracket, which would make this happen. It'll loop this section. And then if I want to release, I would right click. And this is more advanced because there's other stuff that needs to happen in the data entry for this to take effect. But that's basically the idea of the instrument design. So now that we have our instruments, the next step is to see how we can input the notes into the tracker. To do this, you can use your regular computer keyboard, or if you prefer, I'm going to show you how to hook up a MIDI keyboard. Before we start putting our musical data in, the first thing I want to draw your attention to are the channels that I was talking about before. So the way the trackers work is they play from top to bottom. So if you think about sheet music, it reads from left to right. I almost like to think of trackers almost like an old player piano from like the 1900s, where if I hit enter, you see it scrolling and it's counting up the rows. So something to keep in mind, that your musical data is going to start at the top and work its way to the bottom. Each one of these channels, think of like the channels on a mixer. And as a matter of fact, if I come here and I start playing notes, you even get like an LED light that tells you kind of where the volume is. You can mute the channels by clicking on them, and they'll turn red, and that means they will not play. And if you click on them again, they're black, and they will play. Now let's break down the anatomy of the row. So once again, if I just look at one row at a time, these first three lines, this has to do with your musical pitch. These next two have to do with the instrument. So 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, so on and so forth. This middle, or this third column, is the volume of the note. And then these three, this group of three right here, are the effects. If you click on this arrow here, you can add up to 4 effects. So this is things like pitch slides, portamento, vibrato, tremolo. There's even a arpeggiator effect as an alternative to the step sequencer. We're not going to worry about any of those, but they're there, and it's important to know. So I went ahead and I designed some sounds here, just really simple, nice and easy, nothing crazy. But the one thing I want to draw your attention to is this triangle. If I play the triangle channel is not affected by, this is the triangle channel. It's not, it's basically either on or off. In other words, if I write in a crazy like envelope here, volume envelope, ADSR envelope, the volume for the triangle channel will still remain constant. Just something to keep in mind. So a lot of times you just use short and long sounds. So if I come to a new sequence, for this, I'll just do a 7 notes, and I will leave the last one empty. So this is on for 100 milliseconds and then off for 16 milliseconds, and that sounds like this. So now the next thing is to note is you can either use your computer keyboard, and that works like this from Z till the second bracket. We have basically a C major scale up to D. And then you have your accidentals. It's laid out just like an actual keyboard would be laid out. Sorry. Okay. So if you don't have a MIDI controller, you can use this. It's totally fine. You can use the not the numbers, the arrow keys to kind of navigate around. You can also click and point. That's a handy way to do it. And something else to know is that I can play notes, but nothing is being recorded here. That's because I either have to click this record button or I can hit the space bar. And then now this row turns red. And then as I record notes, it will start recording what I'm playing. And then how I played it back was I hit the enter button. And then that essentially triggers the playback. And then also will stop it. So now I'm going to show you how to connect your MIDI keyboard. If you come up here and you click this settings, like this hammer icon to open the settings, you'll see a MIDI tab. And then what I'll do is I'll turn my MIDI controller on. And then now it will show that my MIDI controller is registering. And then now, if I want to use my MIDI controller, and I'll basically just use a tandem of, I'll use the keyboard to play. And you can even, as it's going, if you're in record, you can record as it's playing. So you can kind of do like tracking that way, which is cool. If you want to get rid of everything, you can click on the pitch, Control A, delete, everything's gone. So cool. So now let's start playing some music. So now that I have my MIDI controller hooked up, I went ahead and I designed some instruments. So we have pulse 1, pulse 2, which is similar but different, triangle, and drums. Basically, this is just a quick drum transient, and the way we're going to use this in the noise channel to create like a drum sound. And the way that this works is you can just program one drum transient, and then by playing different notes on your MIDI keyboard, it's going to change the sound of the drum. So one instrument really kind of gets a lot of bang for your buck. And sneak preview, the next video in the series is going to be how I use the noise channel and how I make different drum effects. So let's get started. And now we have to engage the record. So I'm going to hit space bar. And then we're going to start with the intro for the Mario Brothers theme. And if I play that back, so I have the right pitches, but obviously I don't have the right rhythm or the right tempo. So one way of doing this, of dealing with this, is I can hit the insert button on my keyboard, and that will give me the right rhythm. Every time I hit insert, it will move everything below the cursor down one row. I can also, if I want, I can hit backspace, and it will bring everything back one row, but we want to keep it this way. Another way of inputting notes is to use the down arrow on your keyboard. So that would be like this. So every time I want to skip a row, I just hit down. And then lastly, if you have the same rhythm, you can do something like this. You can copy, paste. But then now I have different pitches. So I'll just show you how I do this. If you hit Control F1 or F2, it will transpose the pitch one half step, either up or down. F1 is down, F2 is up. So we are just going to, it's just going to be, if I do this, you can just get an idea, but I'll just put these in manually because it's going to be easier. And actually, oops. And here's the intro. But obviously it's too fast. So how do we change the tempo? We're going to use the F effect. So if you remember here, we have effects. We don't need all these other ones. We're just going to use this first one. We're going to put in F. This is complicated. This is going to be, I'm going to deal with this in the next video in depth. But for now, just know this. You have this code, right? F means it's the tempo effect. And then these two numbers after are the values. Everything after 20 is going to start increasing the tempo. So F20 is the slowest tempo. F, remember we're dealing with hexadecimal, so F, F, F is the fastest. We want to kind of be somewhere for this. 65 is good. So we have that whole range to explore. And I messed something up here because look, all of these instruments are the same, 0, 0, 0, 0. Actually, what I want is for pulse 1 to be instrument 1. So what I can do is I can come over to the second number here in the pulse channel, and I can go like this. Whoops. Change all of these to 1. Now I have a slightly different timbre there. And then we want these to be the triangle channel. So there we go. So now that we have an idea of how to input musical data into the rows, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of the theme, and then we'll come back and take a look together after I'm done. So here's the Super Mario Brothers theme. It's all done. And let's take a look here in the frame section. These are all the different sections of the song. And there's a few things I'm going to highlight before we get out of here. But first, I'll just play the top of each section so you can just hear what they sound like. So now we're into the A section of the song. If I skip frames, we're in the B section. C section. Then we come back to the A. Here's the D section. So this is not a one-to-one recreation of the original. Like, it doesn't have the same swing groove, and the drum pattern's a little different. But it's something to kind of just for you to analyze and look at and get a sense of how it's put together. So a couple of things that I want to highlight here is, one, as I was adding frames to the section, so there's sections that repeat, but I had a problem where the intro thing happens in the middle of one of the other sections. So as I, like here, if you see here, 0, 0, when I came back to the A section, in frame 3, I just doubled 0, 0, and it just basically played the same thing over again. But there was a point where I had that intro section that I needed to add onto one of the later sections in the song. And the thing is, if I make a change to frame 0, 0 down here in frame 3, it's going to go back and change what I did in the previous ones. So that's something, hopefully that's clear. That's something to keep in mind. So a lot of times what I'll do is I end up copying and pasting large sections of the songs if I need to kind of do some surgery on them in that sense. Another thing to keep in mind is I use the volume effect here to kind of manage the levels of the different parts. So like the noise channel for the drums, I have down at 9 because I don't want it to be overpowering the main melody. And then the harmony part, when the main A section comes in after the intro, I have that at A because I want this pulse 1 to really be carrying the melody. So the other two things, just helpful hints, is like I was saying, enter plays from the top of any given frame. If you want to play from where you left off, you would hit F7, so that's this. But the problem with that is it's not going to carry this F effect. So a lot of times what I like to do is I'll copy paste this every beat or something like that. But what I have here that you can see is here. I have it happening in the middle of this frame. So let's just see how that goes. If I started from here, and then now it picks up the tempo there. So that's pretty much it. So we're going to be talking a lot more about other ideas and techniques in future videos. In the meantime, if you want to download this NSF file, you can do that in the description. And there's also a PDF that has some other helpful things like an effects list and some hotkeys and that kind of stuff. So that's it. That's the crash course. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope that you'll continue to make 8-bit chiptune music. I find that it's a fun medium to work in, even outside of the nostalgia factor. Like, working within the limitations of FamiTracker really opens up a lot of creative possibilities. And I found it to be an excellent intro to synthesis. Before I started working with synthesizers, I really didn't know anything about synthesis, and then when I started to get into it, I found that a lot of the concepts that I learned working with FamiTracker applied directly to that. As I mentioned earlier in the video, here are two other resources that you can check out. One of them is Ben Burns' YouTube channel. He's got a series that goes into the basics of FamiTracker. That was the first thing that I watched, and that was an excellent way to get started. And then another channel that I really like is Matthew Ivik's channel. He goes into some more in-depth creative possibilities, and he also has an excellent PDF book called FamiTracker Fundamentals that if you really want to get into the weeds with making chiptune, that book is a must-have. It's an excellent resource. So, and then also, if you're interested, my name is Gerald. I've been posting here on Intermission Music for a long time. I do a lot of different types of music and music education. So if you want to go further with making chiptune, or you're interested in other kinds of music content, as it's called, I hope you'll check out one of these other videos on screen right now, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.
I think it subtracts probably from our marriage.